making any sense? So here, this divine punctuation is a comma. There's more to this. When we talk about life at its best, life at its best only comes into play and into understanding when we begin to understand the parameters that God has set for our life. Because the book of Joshua, when you read its entirety, it's actually set to establish God's faithfulness to fulfill his promise to his people, Israel. The fact is that he shared with Abraham that he would give Canaan to his people. So it's a book of conquest. It's a book that describes the battlefield of Canaan heritage. So Joshua, the entire book is a book that deals with conquest and commitment. Say with me, conquest and commitment. So when you do an inventory of Joshua's life, you will recognize that Joshua was faithful. You will recognize that Joshua was a praying man. You will recognize that Joshua trusted in God. Even when he couldn't trace him, he trusted him. When you recognize that Joshua was a real follower, he was a real supporter of leadership. And as a result, God instilled in him and gave him what he needed to be a support system, but also in the process, he developed him to be a great leader. What happened was Joshua trusted God even in what was known as seemingly impossible situations. You remember, don't you, when the 10 to 12 spies went over to spy out the land? It was only Joshua and Caleb that came back with a different report. 10 of the people who went over saw the giants and said, we are in the eyes of ourselves like grasshoppers, and there are giants in the land. It was Caleb and Joshua who came back and said, yes, the giants are in the land. But listen, the land is fruitful. And yes, the 10 gave the fact. But listen, our report is not a factual report. It's a faith report. And even though the giants are there, they said, let us go up now at once and take it because we are well able. But he was not talking about their physical ability. But they were talking about their dependence upon God to conquer any enemy. So when you look at Joshua's life, can you look at your life and say that I trust God in spite of what I'm up against? In spite of the giants in my life, can I say that I trust God that he's going to make everything all right? Joshua was a praying man, and he trusted God in spite of what seemed to be overwhelming odds, in spite of what seemed to be an impossible situation. He had faced cynicism. He had faced doubt among his peers. He had been up against major opposition, but yet Joshua maintained the attitude that we are well able because of our dependence upon God. He had reached the point where he had relied not upon his own strength, but the strength of God. So there are three things that I need to share that's found in this first verse, at least, that will help you to understand as we look at our life in relationship to God as Joshua. Number one, I recognize that Joshua had the promise of God. Say with me, the promise of God. Because in chapter 1, verse 5, God said to Joshua, as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. The promise was not only to possess Canaan and to distribute the land, but also you have the promise of my presence. And my sisters and my brothers, I don't care if nobody else goes. I need God to go with me. In the New Testament, Testament, Jesus said, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." So you need the perpetual presence of God as you face life's tedious journeys. You need the presence of God, so you ought to stand on the promise of God that God says, "I am with you. As I was with Moses, I am with you." God's promise is his presence. And with his presence, it prompts his provision. I wish I could preach this. It prompts his provision. What it says is, whatever you need on your journey, you can get it from me. Does not matter how old you are. Does not matter if you have years, you're stricken in your old age and years. Whatever you have, it comes. I wish I had some help. It comes from God. So he says, you have my promise. You have the promise of God. I'm with you. With my promise comes my provision. I am that I am. Where you need me to be, you can write a blank check. Whatever you need, he says, I am. Do you know who he is? Oh yeah, you ought to just turn to somebody and say, he is. He says, I am what I am, that I am. But then secondly, not only do you have the promise that's seen in this text, you have, he says to him, you have the potential. It's in here. See, without the promise, you have no potential. But with the promise, you have the potential. Somebody says, well, what is potential? Potential is untapped and unused strength. It's untapped and unused. It's something you haven't reached it yet. Too many people reach their potential, or they feel they've reached their potential and put a period in their life. But you got to understand, with God, all things are possible. I can't do it. I wish I had some help. All things through Christ who strengthens me daily. So you have the potential. He says, I know that you're old and stricken in years. That's a potential problem. But even with the potential problem, you have the potential to be able to reach purpose.